Hello, BookTube. All right, we're down in puppy territory for the last two bookshelves of the biography section of this library tour. Started rather impromptu a little while ago, and we've been going through the biography section, my favorite books. And I've been noticing with great dismay all the things that I don't have, all the biographies that I don't have. Even if you were to do a list of big name people who interest me, you could still see that there are cases where I don't have even a single biography of one of those people. So more trips to used bookstores, the Brattle Bookshop, are in order, but if for the meantime, we'll do these last two shelves. Not at once. We'll do only one shelf at a time because I'm sitting on the floor, and that's causing all the southern provinces to stop reporting back. So we'll just, and besides, one shelf at a time is about as much tedium as you can take. So the first one here, this is, we've already seen Hermione Lee's biography of Edith Wharton. A terrific book. This is also a terrific book, and I didn't want to not have it just because I had the other one. This is R.W.B. Lewis's biography of Edith Wharton. Very different in tone, in register, very different in emphases from Hermione Lee's book. It's legitimate to have both of them. I wish I had the Hermione Lee in a hardcover, but that's okay. And even just off the top of my head, thinking about this biography section, I realized that although I reference it all the time and think about it a lot, I don't have a copy of Edith Wharton's book, A Backward Glance, her own attempt at autobiography. Don't have it. I don't have Louis Auchincloss's book on Edith Wharton. So anyway, this next one is Robert Mangan. This is a 2-volume life and influence of Erasmus from 100 years ago, and this is incredibly scholarly, incredibly in-depth. You won't find anybody now getting a contract for a 2-volume life of Erasmus anymore. That will never happen. I'm amazed that it happened even 100 years ago. But it's not exactly a thrill to read. You have to have it if you're interested in Erasmus at the level that I am. But it's solid scholarly prose. So the other Erasmus books that we've seen in this library tour are probably the place to start, certainly. But even not starting, I tend to go back to them more than I do to this or to any of my University of Toronto big beige volumes that are collected letters and all that sort of stuff. Okay. All right. We saw this on this channel years ago. You saw me repair it. This is Charles Sumner and the Rights of Man by David Donald. About the great Massachusetts politician. This is, wow. I'll have to remember to link that video if I can find it. I used to do book repair videos when I had a desk. I had a desk in this room. It was right about where I'm sitting now. And then and that's the perfect place to do a repair of a book cover. I mean, I do them now in bed, but I used to do them at a desk, and that made it perfect for filming. And then I had that horrible moment, that horrible, sad, bittersweet moment where I realized I don't ever use this desk, except for storage and piling junk that occasionally used to be just arm swept off the top of the desk. I don't ever use it as a place to work anymore. I would never work at this desk anymore. I phased out of doing that when my previous 2 dogs, when my girls were old and getting sort of needy and didn't want me to leave them ever. And when I was here, they wanted to be next to me. They wanted not just to know that I was in the room, they wanted to be pressing against me. Old dogs sometimes get like this, and in their case, both of them did it at the same time. And so I couldn't justify sitting at the desk looking across the room at them while they were looking at me with sadness. So I stopped working at the desk, and if you move a ritual in your life somewhere else, the ritual starts to reorient to that place, and then you don't go back. And eventually I just thought, just heresy, because keep in mind, I am pre-internet. So that desk used to be where I worked. That was where my typewriter was. That was where my key little library of essential reference works were. That's where all my typing paper was, and all that's where my phone was, which is connected to a landline. That was essentially my office. Before technology existed that could bring your office anywhere you go. So it felt weird to come to the decision, well, okay, if I don't ever use this desk, I'm going to move it out of this room. So I did a repair on this book, but I don't have the place where it was anymore. I'll have to remember to leave a link to that video. Okay, all right. This is Townsend Hoops, The Devil and John Foster Wallace. Much like Charles Sumner and the Rights of Man, or we saw one for John Quincy Adams. Yeah, John Quincy Adams and the Union. These are functional biographies, but as you can tell from their titles, they're also themed in a way, and very intelligently too. John Foster Dulles is a tough figure to do a biography, any kind of biographical study of. It's tough to remain neutral, which is kind of what you want your starting point to be for a biographer, at least. The starting point, you want them to be kind of sort of neutral, and John Foster Dulles is a polarizing figure, to put it mildly. I thought this book was really, really good. Okay, here it is. Great, fantastic. This is Robert Caro's Master of the Senate. The great volume in his long multi-volume biography of Lyndon Johnson. There were a couple of volumes of Johnson as a Hill County, deal maker and deal breaker, and then him as in the early stages of his legislative career. This is him when he was for 12 years a senator, and one of the most powerful backroom and spotlight senators in the whole body. This is an amazing book. Caro at his best, I would say, because it's not just really good Johnson biography, but also a really good book about the Senate, about how the Senate used to work. It's the only Caro Johnson biography volume that I will have. I'm sure it's the only one I really want. This one is Johnson at the height of his power before he became vice president, and it's also a sort of a note to a bygone era, because the Senate doesn't work anything like this anymore. The process that's described in this book had held true for about 200 years, and it held true for about 50 years after this, and then around the time of Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, the whole thing changed completely. It was we don't care about our party's political platforms anymore. We don't care about the planks of that platform. We most certainly don't care about the people we represent. This is Thunderdome now. So it's not the gentleman from Louisiana or anything like that. It's Dick Cheney telling someone to go F themselves on the floor of the Senate and not being expelled. But around that time, around the beginning of the 21st century, Johnson's Senate disappeared. John Quincy Adams, Charles Sumner's Senate disappeared. And I doubt we'll get it back. So this is not only a great portrait of Johnson at the height of his power, I say, but also a great portrait of an institution. I love it. I go back to it all the time. Whereas the other volumes in the Caro Johnson books, I don't think I ever would. I don't think they're not among the books that I wish I had in this section. This next one is a box set, and that is a logistical mistake. There should not be a box set on a shelf, right? Because a box set contains its own shape, so it can function as a bookend. So this really needs to go somewhere else, and other books need to go on that shelf in its place. Books that can't function as their own shapes. This is Lou Cannon. This is his 2-volume life of Ronald Reagan. There's The Rise of Reagan, and then the President Reagan, and there you go. And these are really good. I sort of find myself to reading everything there is ever written about the Reagan era, and I go back to those. going back. I went back to them already. Not the first volume so much, but the second volume I went back to just recently because I'm reviewing a book about the second half of the 20th century, and the linchpin, the absolute linchpin of those years, of those 60 years, if we do it in long terms, is the Reagan era. There's no way around that. There's no way to deny that. And that means that I want to refresh my memory on everybody's observations of certain key parts of that era, and Cannon is definitely up there. Okay, what have we got here? Okay. This is Ferris Greenslet's biography of Thomas Bailey-Aldrich. It's a name that will be totally forgotten. He was a Boston literary figure. He was. It's an utterly fascinating book. It's the kind of thing. When did this come out? 100 years ago? 150 years ago? 1908. And this is the kind of thing that you will find with a surprising regularity at a shop like the Brattle that you won't find anywhere else. Out in ordinary used bookstores, antiquarian bookstores might have this for $500 or whatever, but the Brattle I'm sure I got this for $1. It's a Boston era, so I of course wanted it. This next one's okay. All right. This is Crowding Memories by Thomas BaileyAldrich's wife. And the reason you know that is because she doesn't have her own name, Mrs. Thomas BaileyAldrich. Remember that? No, none of you are old enough to remember that. Once upon a time, that was the wife. That would be true even on her own checks. This is from 1920. Her checks from the bank would say Mrs. Thomas BaileyAldrich. They wouldn't say her name. And this is her memoir. I probably found them on different days at the Brattle, but they belong together. Absolutely. And then, what is this next? Oh, okay. All right. We're sticking with the Aldrich family. This is Abby Aldrich Rockefeller. She married into the Rockefeller family and became a great New York art philanthropist and whatnot. And this is a very, very entertaining book. I remember liking it when I first got it, when it first came out, which would have been, when was this? 1993. And then it went away, and let me see here. We've got the Aldrich family here. It went away in my collection, as books do. As we've seen, quite a few of them are away right now. They shouldn't be. They should be here, but they're not. And then I found it again. The serendipity of those moments at the Brattle is why I used to go all the time. I really need to get back into the habit of going frequently, at least once a week. God help us, at least once a week, maybe twice a week. Certainly in the summer. I talk myself out of it every winter because winters hit me a lot harder now than they used to, so I don't want to go. The Brattle Bookshop has sale carts, an enormous number of sale carts outside in all weathers. And it used to be that I went in all weathers. Deb and I used to stand there in the snow and look at the books. Now, the charm of standing at the Brattle sale carts in the cold eludes me. So I've been making an excuse of not going when it's winter, but it's summer now. For at least a couple of months, it's going to be warm. So I should start going back. Okay, all right. This is H.W. Brands' biography of Ronald Reagan. This did not charm me when I first read it. My review, if I remember correctly, was fairly negative because Brands does a weird thing. And he's not the only one. All the major biographers alive today are doing the same thing, where they look back at a time like Reagan or the first Bush or something like that, and they chronicle it by reading the lawyer-vetted memoirs of the felons who wrote their accounts after the fact. And you can't do that. You can consult those books for color or to find out which lies those felons are telling about what happened in the room, about the Salt Treaty or whatever. But you can't simply rely on those books as if those people were historians and were writing disinterested history. They weren't. Obviously, they weren't. And Brands knows that. And this is an experienced biographer, so this book caught me totally by surprise. That there was all sorts of talk in the investigative journalism circles about how close the Iran-Contra ring ran to the White House, and there was even some talk about it running out of the vice president's office. But the vice president in his memoir says that didn't happen. or Oliver North says this in his memoir. The memoir went through 10 lawyers. It is a widely acknowledged reality by anyone who's an adult that those books are full of lies, that they are composed of lies. You can't go back and use them as primary sources. And a lot of that seemed to be happening in this book. It took me a bit of time to go back to it and appreciate it for other things. And when you do that, those other things are there in abundance. So I went back to it when I got rid of my copy. And then I found that copy years later and decided just to reread it because I like Brands. I really do. So I reread it and saw a lot of other stuff in the book other than that. That outrage came from two sources, I think. One is that I immediately thought about people 60 years from now who go to this book and take it on face value. This is falsifying history. It's extremely irresponsible. The parts where it does that are extremely irresponsible to that person 60 years from now, who's going to look back on this and maybe not think to question. And the other reason that it bugged me the first time is because I went through the Reagan era. buying every newspaper, morning and evening edition, studying every detail of every released report, every single scrap of information that I could pull together. And so to have Ed Meese's account of things taken at face value was just a slap in the face. To all the investigative journalists who put those pieces together, who worked really hard to uncover one of the most corrupt presidential administrations in history. In terms of, well, anyway, I went back and read it again for the other things that it's doing, and I liked those. It still bothers me. It still seems a little bit irresponsible to me, but definitely has a place. It should be with the other Reagan books, but it definitely has a place. Oh, great. Okay, this is Thomas Bailey and Katherine Joslin. This is Theodore Roosevelt, A Literary Life. Here he is with his ostentatious cowboy boots. And it belongs with the other Theodore Roosevelt books, but this is a study of him as a writer. And I went into it, I would ordinarily have scoffed, but I went into it with heightened caution that it might be good because of the Churchill A Literary Life volume that we saw at the beginning of this library tour, which studied Churchill's literary output. And Roosevelt was an indefatigable writer. He wrote all the time, reviewed books all the time, wrote essays and profiles all the time, and he kept doing it. He also wrote serious history that has been superseded, but is really good as a read. He's a terrifically readable author. He wrote accounts, of course, of all of his own doings, and he wrote accounts of his wilderness trips, where he would just shoot everything that moves. And it's an uneven bag. I mean, he wrote for money. He wrote because these things could pump money into the coffers. In my opinion, he virtually never wrote for any higher need than that. I think he just wrote for deadlines. He went to, Collier's or whatever because they were offering him money to write and wouldn't have done it otherwise. But I could be wrong. This book certainly says that I am wrong. But it studies all of his literary stuff and does it in a great way. Really, really enjoyable. I love the company of those two authors for the course of that book. Highly recommend it. Okay, and then the last book on this shelf is Robert Dallek's Biography of Franklin Roosevelt, which I have in a trade paperback elsewhere in this collection. I have this one because I really like the big solid thing and it's full of reviews. But I have the trade paperback because I am quoted on the trade paperback as really loving this book. This is, I think, the best one-volume biography of Franklin Roosevelt. And I consulted, not this, but the paperback just recently. Because, again, I was writing a review on Nigel Hamilton's, the third book in Nigel Hamilton's Franklin Roosevelt trilogy. And I wanted, not to check up on Hamilton. I think Hamilton is a superb historian and biographer, so I don't really, when I'm reading his book, I don't really feel the need to check up on him unless he writes something I know is wrong. But rather to get a sense of a different perspective, another good writer's different perspective on things. So I had to use that. I'm looking around now because I'm not 100% sure where that paperback ended up. That's what happens. That's what happens when I use books. They go, they disappear, and I don't remember where they end up. And that's why my books are always changing. They're always shifting around because I make active use of them. My goal, maybe unattainable, but I am striving towards it, would be to have an entire library that consists exclusively of books that are like that. Exclusively books that I actively use, that I actively love and actively use, as opposed to things sitting on shelves that I just think maybe should be there. I'd rather have a library that I use. Excuse me. But anyway, that is the penultimate library tour shelf for biography. So we have one more to do, and then we'll move on. And my thought is that I'm just going to move on to that next bookcase. I'm just going to go around the room. So eventually I will get to the darkest depths of Mordor over my shoulder there, and we'll maybe try and survive it together. I don't think I want to go straight there. I'm a little bit timid. I'm a little bit intimidated by that horrible space. Although this is pretty bad too. So it'll take us a long time to sift through all of that stuff. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.